13-CD set of American songs compiled by Thomas Hampson. This will be a day you'll never forget. For more information, call 773-279-20.
You don't know that you don't know
The Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Elliott Carter, who will actually be 104 this December, studied in Paris with the famous Nadia Boulanger during the 1930s. Back stateside in 1942, he wrote 3 songs based on the poetry of the American poet Robert Frost. In the first song, Dust of Snow,
pioneering by, they throw a forest down, they scoff, then looking, they plant dead trees.
leads to mistrust and unrest. Citizens, please think wisely. The best way to deal with race relations is to respect everyone, no matter how their skin looks, no matter what their origins are, and no matter what their religious beliefs are. Don't waste taxpayers' time and money having so-called special meetings to justify your bad behavior. Instead, protect children and young adults from harm by devoting the same resources to their safety as to your own. That could make Evanston truly a peaceable city. Protect the trees at Kendall, protect all trees. That could make Evanston truly a tree city USA. Show respect for all people, no matter what their skin color, origin, religion, or beliefs. That is your duty to the citizens of Evanston. Yes, that is your duty to the citizens of Evanston. I shall return.
Thank you. That concludes citizen comments. City Manager, next is special orders of business.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, and I can say for those who are watching at home, we had some audio problems which we just have fixed. So, Ms. Alexander, thank you for your call. Item SP1, Ordinance 1050-12, increasing the number of Class T liquor licenses permitting issuance to Smiley Brothers Restaurant and Brewery at 1615 Oak Avenue. This is for action.
Move adoption of ordinance 105-0-12.
It's been moved and seconded. Seeing no lights on to indicate anyone wants to discuss this, City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover. Aye. Alderman Rainey.
Aye.
Alderman Burris.
Aye.
Alderman Fisk.
Aye.
Alderman Braithwaite. Aye. Alderman Nguyen. Aye. 9-0.
9-0, the motion passes. Next item is SP2.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, as a reference which had gone to the Rules Committee, but given the need for the special council meeting this evening, I placed it on the agenda for consideration this evening for the full council, was a reference from Alderman Holmes regarding options to encourage police officers and firefighters to live in Evanston. This is obviously a large issue, and what we would like to do, if you would like, is to have Godwin Chen, our local government management fellow, who's prepared a very broad overview of what some other communities do. He's prepared to walk through that report, or we can just open it up to questions. Madam Mayor, it's up to you.
Well, Alderman Rainey.
I'm just wondering, Alderman Holmes, didn't you make this reference a couple of years ago?
Well, actually, I was going to refer back to not only a couple of years ago, it's been 2006.
Since you got on.
Since I've been
really,
on the
yeah.
council, so it's not a new item.
No, I didn't think
And I
it-
would want to address that, but I would let Godwin make his report, and then we'll talk
I
what's the
just
reason
wanted
why.
to- This is the same. yeah.
Absolutely.
You've been talking about this.
All right, Mr. Chen, you're on.
Sure. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Godwin Chen, ICMA Fellow with the City Manager's Office. I was asked to do a brief report on, do a report on financial incentives or any kind of incentives that could encourage public safety officers to reside here in Evanston. So I researched 4 other communities, and what I found were work where you live, live near your work programs. And all of these programs basically incentivized public safety officers through financial means, anywhere in the range from $1,000 to $4,000 from the local municipalities themselves. And this does not include matching funds that might come from county or state or federal government. And in some cases, they were also able to establish partnerships with private contributions from private businesses who wanted to make a broader effort to encourage everyone to live in the city. So what I've seen is through partnerships with existing relationships with local governments, banking institutions, they've been able to provide down payment assistance or provide the option of reduced mortgage interest rates. And through this partnership, they've also been able to offer reduced settlement and administrative costs. So there are small variations to all these programs in these different municipalities, but generally speaking, in its essence, this is what these types of programs look like. And there are different qualifications that different municipalities have for people who could participate in this program. Some of them are very open, where there is no income restriction, and that generally these employees do have to be full-time, or in the case of public safety officers, sworn employees. And the other stipulation is that this property that they acquire does become their primary residence. But outside of that, it would be up to the council, if you were to decide to proceed with a program like this, whether there would be an income restriction for people who can't participate, or whether there won't be. And another area are property qualifications, in terms of what kinds of properties that public safety officers would be able to acquire, and whether there will be limits on the value of the property being acquired. And some other municipalities have targeted specific neighborhoods for participation in this program, where other municipalities have opened it up to anywhere within their city borders. So that is the outline of these types of programs, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Alderman Holmes?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to bring this to light again, because I'm not really sure that we've even discussed this since this council has been together. But this is not a new issue for Evanston. When I first came on the council, there were people coming asking for a head tax, if I remember correctly. There's been all kinds of suggestions about encouraging people who work here and take the tax dollars out of Evanston to another community. And one of the things was to encourage employees of the city and the school districts as well to live in the community. This came up now. You're absolutely right, Mr. Risky. It came up now because, if you remember, there were several references to people living in Evanston when we had the last Human Services Committee, I believe. And I made the reference then. But I was also thinking in terms of a little bit deeper than just having people come and live in a crime-ridden area. That was not my thought at all, because I'd like to think of Evanston as one city and not two, although I recognize that we have some of those issues. But since we have so many new developments now, Focus development that's going up, we have Emerson Square that's coming up, that we might want to think about encouraging and coming up with some incentives that would encourage city employees, especially our first responders, to maybe live here. Would be very helpful to the community, and also, I think, beneficial for them in terms of travel time. So that's why the reference, and I would really like to hear other council members' thoughts on it.
Thank you. Alderman Grover?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Alderman Holmes. I'm interested, too, in understanding the interest of our employees, our sworn officers, in, number one, owning a home if they don't already in Evanston, if there's interest in living in Evanston, if they would be incentivized, if the program would actually provide the incentive for them to live among us in Evanston. So there are ways to survey our employees, I'm sure, and take their temperature on this one. That is, would an incentive help them? Would they be interested? Are they interested in making this their primary residence if they don't already own?
Thank you. Alderman Fisk?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, that was my question was along the same lines. And Chief, I was wondering if there were any officers who had, from time to time, expressed an interest in living in Evanston, but for whatever reason could not afford it, or if there were other reasons that they would not be coming to Evanston.
Good evening, Aldermen and members of the council. I've had periodic conversations with officers, but based on an email from Alderman Grover this afternoon, I suggested that we prepare an internal survey, conduct that survey that will hit those highlights, because one of the things it's a reality in this is at different stages in one's career, the housing options, desires are different. When I came to Evanston, I downsized from a single-family, three-room home to a two-bedroom condo. And so that's because of where I am in life versus there was a time where I had to get a three-bedroom house. And so it depends on where the officer's at, what their primary desires are in those housing markets. So I think if we do the survey, we'll get a snapshot of our current public safety employees, and that will give you as close as we can get to real-time information, so you have some feedback on what the desire is and how big the incentives you would have to consider to pursue this.
Thank you, Alderman Fisk. Alderman Tandem.
Thank you. Mr. Chen, you mentioned that you had looked into some other communities. Is there enough information out there as far as the rate of success or what these communities have achieved in the time they've been doing this?
The communities I've looked at have had this program open to all municipal employees, so there's no apples to apples comparison, but in all the cases that I have seen, this program has been very successful, and that their allocated funds for it have been depleted on an annual basis.
Alderman Wilson.
I'd be very interested to hear what the survey results yield, so that would be, I think, helpful for us. I have very strong reservations about how we could possibly do this in a fair manner. I think if we did this for police and fire, other city employees would wonder why they wouldn't get a similar type of incentive. Also, depending on where you are in life, somebody might want to live in an apartment. So if somebody might choose to live in Evanston and be spending their money here but not own a home, there's such a vast array of circumstances that I can't even imagine how we could ever fairly apply some kind of program like this. Or what if somebody takes the job 6 months later somewhere else? Are we going to want the money back? It seems like it seems like a good idea, but I don't know that there's any way to make it a fair thing or appropriately applied. And then the other thing I am concerned about is what are we actually going to get out of it? If a lot of people take advantage of it, what do we get for that? I'm not really seeing what benefits we're going to get on the street from a certain number living here. I understand the theory and the argument, but I think as a practical application, if 10 people move into condos and we give them $5,000 each, that's not really going to address the core concern. So it's not a question for you. I'm just sharing some of my reservations.
Thank you, Alderman Braithwaite.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and as well, thank you, Alderman Holmes, for raising this issue. I think it's a healthy conversation to have. Godwin, I'm looking forward to hearing some of the answers to the questions that were asked earlier. And then to Alderman Wilson, I don't know if I can answer all your questions, but I can tell you one of the things that we focus on and on the NWEB committee is recycling tax dollars. So I think this makes as much sense as it does spending locally. We can either send our tax dollars outside of the community, or we can try to recycle our tax dollars in the community. And I see a benefit in spending more locally, as well I see a benefit of our police officers and or city employees working locally. And I don't want to go too far off subject, but growing up, there used to be a time, Officer Wilson, when I knew a majority of the police officers that worked in town. And I can tell you, as a kid growing up, in the town. It's difficult to make the comparison now, but when you go to church and you see the police officers that service the town, I think that sends a different message to our children. Our police officers that worked in town volunteered at many of the places that I went as a youth. You would also see the police officers in the stores, and they were part of the community. So when you hear concerns coming from the same community that I grew up in, particularly the black community, that there's a disconnect between the officers, I think this is a healthy conversation to have, and I'd be willing to explain more to you, one-on-one. But I'm glad we're having this dialogue. I don't see anything wrong with it, and again, Chief, I'm looking forward to hear what the results of your survey.
Thank you. Alderman Rainey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, there was a time, Alderman Braithwaite, when I believe I knew most every single officer. Maybe not their name, but at least by face. And, a lot of those guys that we all knew have retired or moved on. So I see officers today, I have no idea who they are. I've asked people, how long have you been on the force? And they say 5 years. So they're not all that new. But I've had a police officer living on my corner, less than probably 100 feet from my house. And I have never had a break-in in 26 years, just so you know. He's very effective. And unfortunately, he's retiring too. Carl Babs Fowler lives on my corner. So I have talked to officers in the past about this issue when it's come up before. And here's what I've been told and been given examples of so-and-so lived here, and then he got married, and then they had a baby. They are now living in whatever suburb they're telling me about, where they have twice as much yard, twice as much house, half the mortgage, and half the taxes. And sometimes it gets to be just plain, simple financial reality that they have to face. And so that's one reason I think some don't live here. However, if we do a program, and I would support a program 100%, but I wouldn't support a program that said a cop had to live in a certain neighborhood or in a certain kind of house. I don't think it matters where you live in Evanston. I know about Evanston because I live here. You can't read about us in the paper from, Buffalo Grove or Mount Prospect. If you live here, you know things differently. I mean, I've talked to officers on the force who are out there who are very community-minded, who don't know some of the little nuances and important things that I think it's important for police officers to know. And I think they would know that if they lived here. So I don't think it matters if they live in a condo, if they live in an apartment, if they live in a house on Jackson or on Dobson or wherever, on Sherman, or even on Orrington. I don't think it matters where they live. If they lived here, I think that would be good. I think they have a different sense of the community. But I wouldn't support anything that restricted where they could live. I just wouldn't do that.
Thank you. Alderman Holmes.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey. I feel exactly the same way. We were just talking about living in Evanston. I remember, and Alderman Nguyen and Alderman Rainey, I'm sure, and Mayor Tisdall, if you remember when we were doing Darrell Corners, there was a police officer who came many times and spoke because she wanted to buy a house and she knew that she could afford it, and affordability was the issue. She since bought a house. She bought a house in Zion and commutes from Zion here. She's still a police officer on the force. So there are officers who would live here if they could afford it, and that's just an informal survey. So affordability is an issue for some, and I'm sure that there are many, many reasons. But I think that if we are creative enough to offer some incentives that would help them deal with the affordability piece, that is something that, who knows, maybe we'd get one, maybe we'd get 10, who knows? But maybe we'd get some if we would put forth an effort.
Thank you. Alderman Nguyen?
I do think this is a very good conversation to have. I think that there are subtle aspects of living here that are different than working here. And I think that working here as part of the police department and the fire department, there's an aspect of Evanston that you know because of your job, but there's another part of Evanston that you know because you live here and go to church here and have neighbors and coach a baseball team or volunteer or lead a Girl Scout troop. What I'd like to know also, Chief Eddington, when you do the survey is I'd like to also ask if the officers, if they have ever served in a community where they have lived and whether they felt that there was a material difference. And because I do think, I agree with Alderman Holmes that there is, and Alderman Rainey, that the financial aspect of this is a big one, and it's partly probably why we don't have as many officers living here as we used to. So I think that some of these finer details, and Alderman Wilson raises some excellent ones, but how do you make this fair? How do you ensure that it's flexible enough so that someone who marries someone who now works at Abbott Labs can move halfway in between, something like that? And I look at the other programs that already have been in place. So, and Chief Huntington, why are you laughing?
One spouse has a great deal to do with where one lives.
Right, yes.
I'm speaking personally, so.
Right, yes. No, I understand. Exactly. So I think that's another complication that's present that wasn't present 30 or 40 years ago. But I think that there are many subtle aspects of the community that you learn. And certainly all of us know the experience of running into your child's teacher in a grocery store with your child who can't recognize the teacher because she's standing in the frozen food aisle, not in front of a classroom, but what a difference that makes. So, but you looked as though you were about to say something before, Chief Eddington. And I wanted to...
we will draft the survey and with Godwin's assistance, and also run that draft by the city manager and the council to make sure we haven't overlooked any of these nuances, because this is going to be more complex than where do you live, where do you want to live, how much does it cost. There are other significant issues, and if I may say, interestingly, if you talk to the teachers who have those conversations in a frozen food aisle, there's going to be a different reaction. And once again, speaking from personal experience, when my kids were little, I did not live in the jurisdiction I worked in. So when I went to the school board meetings and I went to parent-teacher night, I was just some other crazed parent who thought he had the smartest kids, versus you're now arguing with the police chief. And that's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah.
And it's a totally different dynamic for the officers, especially dependent on the age and where their kids are in school and that type of thing. And that's something that we will attempt to include in the survey when we conduct it.
And I recognize that, and that I think all of us who have kids in the school at different times really like to be our children really like to be anonymous at different times. So that is another factor.
But we will show you the survey to make sure that all your concerns are addressed, and obviously we'll leave space at the end for narratives should the officers be inclined to.
That would be
opine.
very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I guess I'm inclined at this point to feel that it might be better for us to consider, if we're heading in this direction, incentives rather than a requirement that you live in Evanston. Again, having spent the large part of my adult life driving people around showing real estate, I can tell you that the points that Chief makes and the points Alderman Nguyen makes are very important. You can have a couple, and most couples work these days, where you can have one working in one community, the other one serving in another community. And as far as making their own personal lives work, they have to settle on a place in between. And so I think when the chief talks about the different points where you are at your life, that can make an incredible difference. I'd hate to see our pool of qualified candidates be reduced by a residency requirement. But I guess what I would like to stress as you two work on the survey is to make it as objective and positive as possible, so to give us the information that we really need. What would bring you to Evanston? What would encourage you to live in Evanston? If not now, when? And I think that knowing a little bit more about, their, again, the point where they're at in their lives, whether that's a, young family with children or, an adult family or a family with adult children who aren't living at home, I think that would be useful information for us to have as part of the survey.
Thank you. Alderman Rainey?
Along the lines of the survey, I would really like to see a survey that was in no way whitewashed in any way. I would like a survey to include a question of if what are some of the reasons you wouldn't want to live in Evanston? Because I really want to get, if they don't want to live in Evanston because they think our schools are bad, then I'd like to hear that so that we can get a true picture. I mean, there's no point in us working on, all these incentives if, 90% of those who most likely could live here don't want to live here if they have children. I mean, so I think we should really know why. I mean, I think we know that the costs are high here. So that's something we know. But there are some nuances that we don't know, for sure.
Thank you. Alderman Braithwaite?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This question can either be to Wally or to the Chief. Some time ago, when I first started, I remember Chief Clyburn had a special recruiting effort for Evanston residents when he was recruiting for the fire department. And I'm curious to know what type of efforts do we do at the city to recruit from within?
Alderman Braithwaite, members of the council, we do a variety of things, and actually we are currently looking at those processes right now, and we'll probably come back to the council at the end of the year kind of with a fresh approach to that. I think we struggle because of the breadth of what we do. We have many jobs that are available to people with a variety of different skills, and then we also have many jobs that are very specialized. And so I think we're going to look at that as we move forward. I think we always try to get Evanston residents as best we can, but sometimes with some of the professional positions, planners, engineers, that's not always skill sets that we'll find here locally. About 30% of our workforce lives in Evanston. Another 30%, I think, is in Skokie and Lincolnwood, and then the balance is scattered far and wide. We have employees in Wisconsin, employees in Indiana, really all over. So I think, Madam Mayor, members of the council, I don't see any other lights. I think we've gotten some direction this evening to move forward with the survey. I'd like to include all first responders. So in addition to police officers and firefighters, we also have an issue with public works. We are having fewer and fewer of our field staff in public works, parks and rec, and in utilities living nearby. And when things go bump in the night, we're finding we're having employees with longer and longer times to report, and we're having to struggle with additional requirements there for on-call, especially in our utilities operation. So without objection, we'll go ahead and make that available to all of our field staff. We'll have them self-identified. You work in police, fire, that so we can cross-tabulate the information appropriately. But we'll do that and try to come back. The council's agenda is fairly full through October, November. Perhaps we can come back to either December or January rules with the results of the survey. And as the chief indicated, we'll circulate it prior to putting it out, hopefully in the next 30, 45 days.
Thank you. Next is SP3, status of police complaint investigations given expedited Greenwell investigation.
And Madam Mayor, members of the council, as we've kind of took 3 meetings and combined them into one, Chief Eddington wanted to share with the Human Services Committee this evening an update on these investigations, so we thought it appropriate to bring it to the full council.
Good evening, Mr. City Clerk, City Manager, Alderman, Your Honor. I communicated to City Manager Bobkowitz on the 25th of September via memo that with the short timeline I have committed to in the Greenwood investigation, that will put all other OPS investigations on hold. We will still do the intake process, but with only 2 investigators assigned to OPS, everybody's going to be in the queue until we've completed the Greenwood matter, and that will require substantial substantial resources in OPS with the commander and the sergeant, and also significant amount of work with the Corporation Council to make sure that the product is appropriate. But I wanted to alert the city manager and the council that there will be some additional delays and other complaints based on the consumption of time in a short period of time by the OPS investigators.
Thank you, Chief. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, that brings us to adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Why?
Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. You don't sound like you believe it. You had to say it twice. Couldn't handle 6:45.
I relate to it, actually. I went to France when I was 15 years old with my family, and I just was so into Europe, and everything that I saw so amazing to me, drinking